Just no. Nope. Designed by influencers. I'm out. I pass, I think it's a dud. The price is way too high. They are not an established brand like Jackson, Ibanez, Charvel, etc. Hard pass. I highly doubt these will sell. It looks like a cheap budget guitar. For $24.99, that better say Paul Reed Smith on the headstock. I'll be surprised if there's much of a market for reinvented 80s shredder guitars, especially at this price. No way I fork over $2,500 for a no-name guitar company. Anybody who's nostalgic for the 80s will buy a real 80s shredder for half the price. Sorry, but this seems nonsensical to me. Dead on arrival. Just comes off as another fly-by-night company that's gonna end up folding one way or another. That was just some of the online reaction to the announcement of the Badlands Guitar Company starting up in 2023. People were heavily critical of it and expected it to fail, and sometimes that's all is needed for it to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And put it this way, if that was a focus group of a new company, I'd be worried. Which makes it all the more impressive that they not only haven't failed, but they've succeeded in pretty much everything they set out to do, selling out of every run of guitars, hundreds of high-end, boutique and in turn expensive guitars sold out. So how did they do it? How did they go from people anticipating their failure to them being successful? Well, I think it's a very interesting case study of the guitar business in general, so let's take a look at what made them stand out, what made them different, and what ultimately led to their success. YouTuber guitar brands. YouTuber guitar brands are a relatively new thing. I say relatively, the first one started producing guitars 15 years ago, but in that time, there hasn't really been all that many. I for one thought there were a lot more than there really are. Right now, there are only 3. Now I will say, I know that Dean Lamb is starting one up, but at the moment that's not a thing yet. So there are only 3 YouTuber guitar brands. There is Chapman Guitars, Solar Guitars, and Badlands Guitar Company. That's it. I thought there were a lot more. But what is the difference between a guitar brand and a YouTuber guitar brand? Well, not a huge amount, really. It really comes down to advertising. A guitar YouTuber will have an established audience that they can advertise a product to, whereas a new company that is not attached to a YouTuber has a new product that they don't have an established audience to advertise to. That's really the only difference. So it can give you a bit of a head start at the beginning, but other than that, it's not all too different, because most companies apply the same tactics, really. They hire a YouTuber to make a video about a product. It ultimately ends with the same result. So there isn't a huge difference between just a guitar brand and a YouTuber brand, aside from the initial audience that they can advertise to. But out of the 3 YouTuber brands, Badlands were definitely the underdog of the 3, for a couple of reasons. First of all, audience size. Audience size translates to sales. Simple as that. So when you look at the brands, you've got Chapman Guitars, which is Rob Chapman, 700,000 something subscribers, and with a push from Andertons, which is, I think, close to 1 million subscribers. That's a lot of potential customers. Then you look at something like Solar Guitars, who have kind of transcended YouTuber brand at this point. Again, kind of just, there isn't that much of a difference between a YouTuber brand and a guitar brand. But Solar Guitars started out with Ola England, who has, I think, around 900,000 subscribers at this point. It's still a lot of people. And then you look at Badlands, who initially started with 2 YouTubers. It was the Tone King, who has about 100,000 subscribers, and Philip McKnight, who has around 400,000 subscribers. That's still 500,000 potential people. But Philip McKnight is no longer part of the company, so it's just down to the Tone King, who has 100,000 subscribers. And coming from someone who also has 100,000 subscribers, it's not really a lot, because it comes down to the second part. If you're trying to maximize sales, you kind of want to appeal to everybody's budget. It's the World Wide Web. You don't know who's on the other end of the screen, and if you want to appeal to everybody, you kind of have to strike somewhere in the middle. Badlands didn't do that. They went straight to the top with high-priced boutique guitars, which, like, compared to Chapman, who started out with, I think it was a £199 guitar, or Solar, who started up a little bit in the middle with guitars from around 900, it's still vastly different. So Badlands, kind of the underdog when it comes to YouTuber guitar brands on both numbers of people that they're advertising to and number of people that they're going to appeal to with the price point, and I'll talk a little bit about the price point later on in the video. I think what really set them apart, though, was 2 things. One, their USP, and the second, their ethos. So Let's talk about their target audience. The way that Badlands guitars look definitely appeals to me, but I'm well aware that I am an outlier when it comes to their target audience. It's primarily a pretty niche one. It's rooted in 80s nostalgia for the 80s guitars, but I would argue it is a bit different, and that does set them apart. When I think of 80s guitars, I'm thinking of the ones that were played by the 80s rock stars, right? You've got Warren DeMartini, he had graphic guitars. You've got Zakk Wylde, Eddie Ojeda, George Lynch, CeCe DeVille, the guys from Warrant, and of course a bunch more. And if you're like me and you weren't even alive at that point, all you've got to look back on and listen to the music that you like, or like the music videos and the grainy live footage and like the occasional pictures of guitar rigs that are also grainy, and you see that it feels like almost everybody had graphic guitars, but the reality of it was quite different. Most guitars, kind of like today, were not. It was plain solid colors. A lot of white guitars, I noticed when you look back at like a lot of 80s guitar catalogs, a lot of white guitars, but again, just kind of plain. It was the rock stars of the time who were getting custom shop stuff and getting custom shop graphics, so it feels like they were everywhere, but looking back, it doesn't look like they were for the common person. So if you want a graphic guitar, it looks like a lot of the time you had to go custom. And that, I think, does ring true today as well. There aren't all that many graphic guitars aside from signature guitars. You know, you can pick up an EVH Stripe graphic, the classic stuff, or you can look at some Zakk Wylde stuff for the bullseyes. You can get Warren DeMartini signatures from Charvel and George Lynch signatures from ESP and LTD. But there's very few standalone graphics, and even then, if you're looking at those signature guitars, a lot of the time they are decals, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You're not going to be able to tell that it's a decal from like 5-6 feet away, but up close, it's going to be a little bit different from paint. You know, when you're painting something, you can make use of things like metallic paints, and you can do some fancy stuff. When Badlands came on the scene, they kind of were the only company to offer a graphic that was standalone, not a signature guitar, and was fully painted. It wasn't a decal. And that really is a unique selling point. There really aren't that many guitars that have graphics. Like, hang on, I'll show you. To prove my point that these type of things appeal to me, this guitar was custom made for me. I had to go custom, and I wanted a graphic. I wanted to be like the guys from Warrant who had graphic guitars, and they were all really cool and fun. And this was just a simple graphic, very, very simple to do, but I had to get this custom done. And if you want to go down that route, it's just harder. It's a lot more work. You have to find somebody who's willing to do a paint job, which is easier said than done. And I would add another pro of using paint instead of a decal is the decals really kind of go on the top. They can kind of go over the edge a little bit, but they can't really wrap around a body like paint can. So like if you look at the Badlands examples, you can see that the paint wraps around the body, even goes so far as to up the entire neck, back of the neck and headstock. I've never actually seen that before. So unique selling point, tick. Ethos. At its core, Badlands really seems, and I really don't think it's anything deeper, than a couple of guys who are making guitars that they want and are giving people the opportunity to buy one as well. I really don't think it's anything deeper than that, and I will expand on why a little bit later on. But with that ethos, I like that for a couple of reasons, because it means that the guitars kind of end up existing not just to sell units. That's really not the drive, but more so it's a guitar that somebody wanted, and you can buy it if you want, and you don't have to if you don't want. And I think this is exemplified by A, the low number of units. All of these are done in runs no bigger than 100 guitars. So there's that. And B, the disclosures. This is something that I have never seen any company do, ever. And I think we all know why. I'm going to pull up the Badlands website. We'll just take a quick look. So these are the new Badlands guitars for 2025, these graphic ones, and then they've also got the solid stuff. But if you come over to here and you go into spec sheet and disclosures, you'll get this. Now in this, they do it for every guitar they produce. They've got this disclosure sheet, which is, it shows where everything originated from that they know of. So look, bodywood is Alder, it's USA. Carbon fiber reinforcement rods, USA. Frets, Jescar, USA. Inlays, mother of pearl, they don't know. They openly say they don't know. Neckwood, maple, USA. Fingerboard is ebony, so it's going to come from Africa. But then you look at like the electronics, USA, 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 Taiwan, Taiwan, China for the battery box, I think that's the only thing from China. All the hardware is USA. The output jack cover, the strap buttons, the truss rod cover, pickup rings, like these are small things that would be absolutely overlooked by everybody, and yet it's all USA. USA Floyd, USA Spurzl locking tuners. This is all USA. But I think this is the coolest thing. They actually visualize it with a little Pac-Man guy. USA 81%. So this USA made in the USA guitar is actually made in the USA. To my knowledge, they are the only guitar brand to ever do that, and probably will be the only brand to ever do that, because well, we know why others are not doing it. And without spoiling any future KDH videos, we could look back at the past and look at the guitars that maybe influenced Badlands from the 80s, right? You've got Kramer. Made in the USA is what it says, but they were made in Japan necks, made in Japan bodies, bolted together in the USA. Not quite the same thing. And then look at the golden era of BC Rich, which is prominently known now as being body cores that were made in Tijuana and then driven up to Los Angeles to be finished off and therefore made in the USA. But actually the bulk of it was done in Mexico. So that was happening in the 1980s. The fact that Badlands are being entirely open about where everything comes from is cool. You can't knock that. I think more companies should do that. Will they? Probably not. But it would be cool to see that. The price tag. Make no mistake, Badlands guitars are not cheap. They are not inexpensive. I think the first run, the red lines, they were $2,500. They were just starting up. Then they went into the hollow flash. I think that was $2,750, and then they had the Hellcat, which I think was 3K, and then now they've got the GX1 Pros, which are like the neck through ones, and they range from I think 3,000 for a non-graphic one to the graphic being 3,500, I think, around that. So definitely not inexpensive. It is a premium price, but what are they competing with? Well, we've talked about the graphic guitars. They're not really competing with much. So you'd have to look back into the 80s. You'd look at the guitars that inspired these. And, well, there are a couple of drawbacks to getting a guitar from then. The first is, well, a 1980s guitar is vintage. Whether people want to hear this or not, probably it's going to hurt it's going to bruise some egos. But if you bought a 1959 guitar in 1999... that is the same amount of time of me today buying a guitar from 1985. It's the same amount of time. 80s guitars would be classed as vintage now. And with vintage guitars, you get some vintage problems. First and foremost, it's a 40-year-old guitar and you don't know how it's been kept. It could be stored in a basement for 20 years, just soaking in dampness. The frets might be completely worn out. You might have to redo that. The truss rod, who knows if it works or not. There can be problems with used guitars, especially the older they get. So I guess Badlands are competing with this in a way of offering a new 80s guitar, I guess. That would be kind of my interpretation of it. And also for less money. Like, you look at some of the guitars that would be inspiring the Badlands stuff, and the ones that are in decent to good condition often are significantly more expensive than even what you would call an expensive guitar. Like, the Badlands are an expensive guitar. The 80s ones are also still more expensive. Then we're not even factoring in graphics. Like, painted graphic guitars are a lot rarer, like I mentioned earlier. And if you want to compare new guitars for new guitars, take, for example, Charvel. It's a brand from the 1980s and they make guitars today still, and if you look for a hand-painted one, like for example this one, it's still significantly more expensive by over $1,000 than the Badlands. Now, I've seen some people say that Badlands is just a cash grab, and this is primarily based off the guitars being expensive, which they are. But I can categorically say that the cash grab accusation is completely false, and I can say that because I've seen it with my own eyes. Now, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but if this part of the video is kept in, it's because I got the A-OK. I've spoken with Lewis, the Tone King, in depth about this guitar brand. And he shared the figures with me. He's shown me their margins, and all I can say is no one's getting rich here. They would make a lot more money if they were making import guitars, for example. And I do have some thoughts on that later on in the video, but this is far more of a passion project than anything else, which I think kind of falls back into what they've kind of been saying and what I believe to be the case. It's a couple of guys who are making guitars for themselves, and we'll put them up for sale for someone if they want it. That's kind of what it is. Resale value. If there's one way to extract all the fun out of guitars, it's by talking about resale value. I really don't like it, because I think it's kind of, you're thinking about selling a guitar before you've even bought it. You haven't even played it. You're not playing the guitar, you're just thinking about selling it and how much money you'll get. And I find that to be negative fun. But it's something that a lot of people do talk about and they concern themselves with, especially with the new brands, because it's not uncommon for a new brand to not maintain particularly high resale value. You know, you can buy a guitar for $2,500 and then you'll have to sell it for $800, which isn't all that great either. It is to be said. And that's why it was very surprising, because a lot of guitars, they maintain resale value based off brand recognition. It was really surprising that Badlands actually have pretty good resale value. I went onto Reverb and just checked on the sold listings, and I checked on the ones that didn't have any offers, which means that they sold for the prices that are listed, and they really aren't all that far off what people paid for them. In some cases, people are trying to even get more off the guitars than what they paid for them. So Badlands actually have good resale value, and I would probably base this off a couple of things. One, like I said, they're not really competing with anybody. There isn't anyone at the moment making guitars that are graphicked, definitely not painted graphics. So they've kind of got the market cornered there. And secondly, it's the low number runs. They make guitars, there's only like 100 guitars made, so that's max. And they also have this thing about they don't reproduce the same guitar. So if there's a guitar in that finish and you like it and it's sold out, you have to buy one secondhand. That's it. That's your opportunity, and you've only got 1 in 100 chances how many people are going to put them up for sale. So I think that's kind of why it's maintaining value. There is a market here, and people want the guitars. And when it comes to Badlands' success and future success, this is great news for them, because people do factor in resale value into purchasing guitars. They would be afraid to lose a lot of money on resale if they don't like it, and in this case, it doesn't look like that would happen. So it's going to incentivize more sales, likely. At present, Badlands are launching a new run of guitars. I think it's their first neck-through guitars, and the graphics look cool, at least to me. And I think they will be quite successful with that. I think my guess is they'll be more successful with the graphics than the solid colors. That's just a guess, though. But I think that's kind of their USP, is graphics. People will pay a little bit more for the graphics rather than just the solid colors. When it comes to their future, I think they will be quite successful at what they're doing. There's nothing to indicate that they won't be. They do have an audience and a base of customers that are interested. So I think they will be successful here with what they're doing. But I actually think that they are primed in a place where a lot of companies would love to be for future success. And I'll explain why. It's hard to start up a guitar company, no doubt about it. But it's very hard to start up a guitar company and go straight into boutique sales, selling guitars that are, frankly, very expensive. And it's hard to convince people that they are worth the money and that they've got the quality, and you're getting something that you can't get elsewhere. But once you do convince people that, then you've got a reputation, and that's very valuable, because it is 1,000 times harder than any of that before to start off as a budget brand and then try and sell boutique expensive guitars. I'll give you an example. We've talked about it before on the channel. Chapman Guitars, another YouTuber brand, they started off by selling budget guitar. The first Chapman guitar was £199. Now this was 15 years ago. And they slowly, steadily creeped up. They got into the £500 mark, then into the £1,000 mark, and even the £1,500. But that's where their success stopped. In the history of the company, I think it was 3 times, at least 3 times, separately, that they tried to launch boutique branded custom guitars. And each and every time, it failed. And did it fail because the guitars weren't good quality or there were problems? No. It failed primarily because of human nature. It is just way harder, marketing-wise, to convince people to spend a lot more on what originates as budget than to convince people that they are getting something from a high-end brand for a little bit less. It's way harder to sell. They could be the same quality of guitars, but different marketing. It's way harder. So Badlands are actually in a absolutely fantastic position. It's a bit early yet, I think. I think maintain what they're doing, keep going for another few years, couple years. Keep pushing out the USA-made, high-end, graphic, 80s cool guitars. Just keep doing that. Maintain and build that name and reputation. And then, a couple of years down the line, start to look at potentially doing import guitars, and not the super cheap stuff. Maybe max it at $1,500. And there's a lot of compelling reasons to do it as a company. From a company perspective, imports can offer you a lot more guitars. You can get a lot more, so a lot more coverage of your brand kind of everywhere, worldwide. It will allow you to have dealers, even in fact dealer exclusives. That could be pretty cool. As well as, well, the margins on imports are up a lot. They're a lot better. They could even take the more profit from the imports and put that into the boutique stuff, pushing that more a little bit. So, there are reasons as a company to do it, but from a buyer's perspective, I really do like the ethos of this company. I think they are offering something that is hard to come by. And I don't want them to lose that either. I think the concept of a couple of guys making guitars that they want is really good, and it's very clear that it's getting results too, because there is passion that pushes forward good things. Like, I was watching a live stream from the Tone King, and he showed off a Badlands prototype, which was, it had the best snakeskin paint job I had ever seen on a guitar. A lot of the time it is the stocking, the fishnet stocking pulled over the guitar, and it's got the same pattern. This thing looked real. And that push forward will only happen with the ethos that they have. It's, I want a guitar for myself, and I'm going to get a really good one. So I think maintain that vision for the custom shop stuff, the high-end USA-made Badlands. But I think it would be really cool to have that vision as well, but just capped at a budget. I want a guitar for myself, but it's going to cost $1,300. What could you do for that? At that price point, you're not going to get hand-painted graphics or anything like that. If you wanted a graphic, it would be a decal. But I still think they could do something cool. Have Badland imports, but not yet. Keep maintaining. Start thinking about it in 2 years. It'll take probably another year of design and stuff before it. You're talking 3 years later, and then you've just launched an entire import line. I think it would be very successful. So while that's all things in the future that I would like to see, and I do think they've got a lot of potential, at the end of the day, I am just a guitar nerd with a camera, so, what do I know? So that was just a little look at the Badlands Guitar Company, a company that's doing something old but new. And I think that's kind of a cool case study of just kind of where you can sit in the guitar industry even today. This isn't a sponsored video or anything like that. This is just my thoughts on a guitar company. But thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, like the video, subscribe maybe for more videos, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.